Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Mayo, and I'm the current provost of the Troth's Lore program. And the Troth is dedicated to promoting inclusive heathenry. And heathenry is basically another term for the polytheistic religions of the Germanic peoples. And so I guess I should talk a little bit this time about what do we mean by the term Germanic? How is it different than simply being German? And what is kind of the history behind this group of people and languages and religions? Germanic is a language family. It basically refers to a larger family of religions. It includes English and the various versions of German and Dutch, the Scandinavian languages that are descended from Norse, uh, and a number of extinct languages, for example, Gothic. And these languages are all related to each other. There's basically a family tree of the different languages that has been developed, that you can figure out how these languages are related to each other and to sort of the larger group of languages that they're part of, the Indo-European language family, which basically includes most of the languages going from Europe down through Persia and then into the northern parts of India. All of these languages were found to be related to each other. It also refers to the people who speak the different Germanic languages, which it's kind of associated with different uh, tribes or ethnic groups during the Middle Ages. And just as these languages are related to each other, each of these languages seems also to have been associated with a traditional polytheistic religion, going through the different Germanic languages all the way back to the primitive Indo-Europeans. And so this makes the different Germanic polytheisms the sort of distant cousin of the Celtic religions and, say, the Roman and Greek religions and sort of the earliest forms of Vedic Hinduism, all seem to be related to each other and kind of descended from a common source. In the 19th century, one of the big discoveries, one of the foundational discoveries in linguistics, was that when languages change and evolve, they follow a set of laws of sound change. And as the language is spoken in different places and among different people, it will be affected by different sound changes and vocabulary changes that differentiate the languages. And the sound changes, at least retroactively, can be reconstructed and applied to try to figure out what the older versions of the language look like. And different languages from the same family can be compared with each other kind of cladistically with these using these different sound changes to figure out how they're related to each other and sort of what the, I guess we call it, family tree of the language is. And one of the big breakthroughs in the 19th century was the determination of how all of these Germanic languages were related to each other. A lot of this work was done by the sort of seminal brothers Grimm, who were interested not just in folklore and fairy tales, but also language and linguistic change, and it's all bound up with various 19th century notions of racial identity and so forth. But it is one of the big breakthroughs in linguistics, and sort of the findings of the relationships between these different languages are basically still valid today, even if kind of some of the associated penumbra of ideas about identity and race are not. The Germanic peoples, located mostly in Northern Europe, and they have a kind of a long history. We can trace them, and we can find the earliest records about them going all the way back to basically the early Roman Empire. There were Germanic tribes kind of living on the frontier of the Roman Empire, to the north of the Roman Empire. And you have a number of famous interactions between the Romans and different Germanic peoples. For example, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in Augustus's reign, in which two legions were ambushed and destroyed by a coalition of Germanic tribes that didn't want to be conquered by the Romans. A little bit later, you have the really important work, the Germania, by Tacitus. And Tacitus was a Roman historian. He gives what's basically a kind of an ethnographic description of the Germanic tribes, and gives a number of names and locations for them, and talks about their culture and their religion a little bit. Historians are sort of skeptical about Tacitus. He probably never actually went there and met these people. And he seems to have been much more interested in the moral decline of the Roman people as they transitioned from a republic to an empire than he necessarily was in the Germanic peoples for their own sake. But he is one of our earliest and best sources of information from this period. We've also got some archaeology in places where there were Germanic speakers. In the Roman Empire, we see different religious monuments that syncretize elements of Roman with elements of Celtic or Germanic religious practices. One of the most famous of these are the Matronae, which are a group of goddesses that show up on different shrines in kind of the northern part of the Roman Empire when it was still polytheistic. The next big event that kind of shapes our story is the so-called Germanic Migration Age. Living along the frontier of the Roman Empire were a number of different Germanic tribes, and they had had a long contact with the Roman Empire. The Germanic tribes were largely agriculturalists. They were not, nomads or pastoralists. So they were not like some of the Central European steppe societies, which were highly mobile and were based on horses and herding animals, and sort of gives rise to kind of cultures like the Mongols or the Turkic peoples, and so forth. The Germanic peoples were not like that. They were basically farmers. They had more or less the same kind of farming technology as the Romans did, although they were at a lower level of social organization. And the Romans liked to have sort of pliant tribes or client kingdoms along their borders. And so they would take the sons of many of the leaders of these tribes as hostages to be raised in Rome. Individual Germanic people would men would go and join up with the Roman legions, and some of them rose to very high ranks. In some cases, whole tribes or groups of warriors were recruited as Roman auxiliaries and allies. And so there's a lot of interchange between the Romans and these Germanic peoples on their frontiers. And then in the 300s and the 400s, these tribes begin basically migrating into Roman territory or invading, depending on how you want to look at it. And again, these are not normally nomadic peoples. The migration age seems to have come about because the different Germanic groups were being pushed over nearer to Central Asia by an emerging confederation, military confederation, based around people who basically were pastoralists and horse-oriented. The Huns, the most famous of which is their king Attila the Hun. But the Hunnic Empire seems to be pushing some of the more easterly German tribes south and west down towards the Roman territories. And so you might also look at these as a kind of refugees, that whole groups of these farming populations were basically fleeing the Huns and moving into places they were familiar with, the Romans to their south. And the Western Roman Empire is, at this point, in kind of precarious shape. It was always less wealthy and more rural, less developed than the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And as these Germanic tribes begin moving into Roman territory, some of them the Romans accept and basically kind of make into auxiliary or federated troops and groups, resettling them inside the Roman Empire. But there's a big battle between the Goths and the Romans at Adrianople, and the Roman army is defeated. And from this point on, the different Germanic tribes are moving pretty freely throughout the Romans down their road network and settling in different parts of the Roman Empire, as essentially the Western Roman Empire's government and military kind of starts breaking down. And you have a number of important peoples from this age. You have the Goths, probably the biggest ones, the Ostrogoths in the east, and the Visigoths in the west. And the Ostrogoths settle in Italy. The Visigoths go into Spain and to North Africa. You have the Franks, who give their name to modern day France, the Burgundians, and a number of other groups. And as these Germanic tribes settle down, they basically end up taking over the different Western Roman provinces, and these becoming kingdoms. And there's a synthesis of Roman and Germanic culture and Celtic in the old Western Roman Empire, that basically gives us a sort of the forerunners of the various medieval monarchies that exist. And you can tell sort of where the original Roman population persisted in larger numbers. These are the places that have Romance languages today, and in places that seem to have had demographically more of the Germanic tribes, you get the places that speak Germanic languages today. But all of them have a kind of a blend of Roman and Germanic features. One of these features is that most of these Germanic tribes had, by this point, like the Roman Empire itself, had already converted to Christianity. The tribe in the Microdori age that is sort of still remains heathen are basically the Anglo-Saxons who move into Roman Britain and are still largely pagan. But the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and the Franks were either already Christian before they start moving or quickly convert to Christianity. And we get sort of our next set of records about Germanic paganism and what it was like from the Migration Age. These sort of post-Roman kingdoms then send out missionaries of their own, and various unconverted tribal groups in Europe end up being converted in the early Middle Ages to Christianity. So, for example, the Anglo-Saxons are basically Christianized by missionaries coming out of Ireland and Italy. The Saxons in to the east of the Franks. There's a big war between Charlemagne, the Christian king of the Franks, and the Saxons, and he basically tries to subdue the Saxons and forcibly convert them to Christianity. And then there's sort of the third wave of Germanic movement and migration, and that involves the groups in the Germanic groups in Scandinavia who have a Old Norse language. Denmark and Sweden and Norway, they were not converted to Christianity, and they, of course, there are Norse adventurers and pirates and tradesmen, merchants who, in the Viking Age, raid and conquer and settle all over Western Europe and Eastern Europe too, taking their language and their culture with them. And these, in the start of the Viking Age, these populations are still heathen, although most of them end up converting to Christianity through their contact with the rest of Europe, and as part of the process of kingdom creation going on in Scandinavia itself. The consolidation of royal power basically is accompanied by a conversion to Christianity kind of all over the Norse world. But this third group here, the kind of Norse version of heathenry, is the one that has the best records for us. And the Norse mythology and information about this religion lasts long enough to be recorded in various places, particularly in Iceland, which is a more conservative society and held on to some of the old oral culture a little bit longer than they did on the continent, and long enough for it to be preserved in the really amazing corpus of Old Norse texts that we have that provide us most of our information about what Germanic paganism was like. Because you can take the names of the different gods and apply these different linguistic transformations to them, representing different sound changes. And you can see these gods then attested in basically different parts of the Germanic world. For example, you've got Odin, the Norse form, and you have Wotan or Wotan, and you have Woden. Depending on which branch of the language you're in, different things happen to the initial vowel and to the T, D, or TH sound in these different languages. And most of what we know about pre-conversion heathenry comes from these Norse sources, and we only have sort of fragmentary evidence from the other languages and cultures. But some branch of this religion went pretty much with every branch of the language throughout its long spread and history of migrations in Europe. And different groups today attempt to reconstruct in various ways the religion of different branches of the Germanic people and language family, uh, even though most of them are dependent for a lot of their information on the Norse branch. So we can't tell exactly how the other branches differed from what we have in the Norse material, other than some educated guesswork. But that is what we mean by Germanic paganism or Germanic polytheism, or heathenry. And heathen is a word from the Germanic language family that's used to describe uh, the pre-Christian polytheisms. It has a kind of a derogatory element to it as it was used by Christians. But that's sort of the label that has been adopted by the different Reconstructionist movements working on different branches of this family of languages and religions.